At the time of recording, it's been out for just about 1 year. In that time, there's been one new master level released, and the first of 2 available DLC, The Ancient Gods Part 1. Also in that time, the surrounding Doom community has grown and grown, working on breaking down every mechanic and every gameplay decision, and how each of Eternal's systems work in tandem to create an utterly unique combat loop. One that takes the fast-paced action of Doom 2016 and molds it into a system that's much more thoughtful, and I think more rewarding to play. I still consistently play this game even after a year, put an ungodly amount of hours that I could have spent doing literally anything else, and recently beat Ultra Nightmare. Finally, I've also enjoyed learning a lot about the depth of game mechanics from content creators like Under the Mayo, Alston, and this guy, among others, and learning about development insights from the man himself, Hugo Martin, who, by the way, streams himself playing through the whole game on the hardest difficulty with a goddamn controller. Now that is a man who enjoys the game he's developed.
Prowlers on this map, on this particular Slayer Gate,
And one aspect of Eternal's design that has come up in gameplay breakdowns or been touched on occasionally, but never really fleshed out into a full essay, is how Doom Eternal integrates timing, pacing, and rhythm into its gameplay loop. So without further ado, let's dive in. So, I started thinking about this after playing for a while and wondering why the grenade launcher on the shotgun does this. Coming from Doom 2016, the small change seems almost pointless. Like, why doesn't the bomb just explode immediately? As I started to pay more attention to it and experiment with it, I realized that it actually serves a few purposes. It conveys a tiny amount of information about what is to come, and allows you to synchronize it with other attacks. So let's go over an example. Taking out both Mancubus cannons. As you attach the sticky grenade to the first cannon, assuming it connects, there's a very obvious blue light that will start flashing. Obviously, this is present for all the big weak points, but it also flashes blue for other non-destroyable weak points, namely things like the heads of every enemy in the game, even the dog, or the rear of Pinky. This is actually a really cool trick of subtly teaching you where enemies are most vulnerable, and I hope it gets expanded on at some point. Now, the great thing is that weak point connections A do more damage, and B have a larger explosion radius. This is especially useful for efficiently taking out fodder, like the cyber zombie, who has more health than the others, but a hit to the head with a grenade will take him out in a single shot. Now, when it comes to the Mancubus, this visual register allows you to foresee 2 outcomes. If it doesn't flash blue, you should probably take aim again and try to hit the cannon this time. The reason it's brilliant to see the explosion before it happens is you get a chance to react before the Mancubus does. Now let's say you do get a hit and see the blue light. When a Mancubus gets his arm shot off, he reacts like an absolute dumbass and swings to the side, shielding himself with the only other bit of decent weaponry he has. Because you were able to see this coming before, you have enough time to move your aim up to his chest and either fire a second grenade or switch to something else that's good for weak points like the precision bolt or the ballista. And the great thing is that because of the timing, this can all be combined into a rhythm. What I'm trying to say is that Doom Eternal is now a rhythm game. So let's examine some other ways this grenade timing can be used. My favorite little trick is the single cycle turret kill. When these were introduced in the Ancient Gods, I realized very quickly that these things can probably be taken out in a single cycle. By doing this. Shoot the grenade from a decent distance so you have enough time so that it doesn't explode right away, and then switch to the precision bolt and shoot within a small time frame of the grenade exploding. This type of weapon synchronization really makes me hope for an implementation of weak points that take 2 or maybe even 3 shots to destroy. So now let's talk about how you can use the grenade timing as a tool, especially for getting a better return on health and armor. The same rules about using the detonation window as a decision-making period applies here. A quick note about the Flame Belch, you don't need to use it on a group of fodder first and then output all the damage. because as long as they are on fire for even an instant before they die, you will receive the maximum possible amount of armor. This isn't essential, but in fast-paced combat, I will sometimes shoot the grenade first, and then instantly realize that my flame belch is available, and try to use it. I also like to toss a grenade down beside a soldier if I'm approaching from above, and then glory kill it as soon as I land. Once again, using the time of the explosion to decide whether to get the iframes and guaranteed health from a glory kill, or if you need to move to a different place fast. These tiny decision frames don't seem to matter in a lot of tame combat scenarios, but when there's a billion things happening on screen, they can absolutely matter. And this is echoed by Hugo himself when he's talking about the design of Eternal's difficulty. The difficulties do not change the effectiveness of your stats or your tools, nor do they affect the stats of enemies. They affect enemy behavior, aka they will attack more accurately, more frequently, and move around more. Hugo describes it like this.
With our difficulty settings, our whole thing is, with each one, you start at the easiest. As you slide it up, you'll be asked to make more decisions per second, and you'll be allowed to make fewer mistakes per second. If I'm on the easiest, or I'm on Hurt Me Plenty default, and then I go up, I will be asked as a player to make more decisions per second. It means that the AI are actually going to throw more heavy shots at me. So like I'll have to do everything I'm doing on the default setting, but I'll have to do it more often and with more skill because it's coming at me faster.
I think this is a good sentiment to describe the difficulty. Understanding Doom Eternal's timing and rhythm element doesn't take you from bad to good, it takes you from good to great. So now, let's talk about the most explicitly timing-based element this game has to offer. Behold my most overlooked part of the arsenal up until a few months ago. Actually, ever since Doom 2016, really. And I'm probably not the only one. Seriously, in 2016 I probably threw about 10 grenades total, because when I'm given a massive arsenal of 9 guns, most of which will obliterate imps in a single shot, I tend to forget about them. When I started Eternal, at a lower difficulty mind you, I still forgot about them. Maybe if it was a nice sunny day out and the weather felt brisk, I'd think, maybe today is the day I finally get to use that frag grenade thing. I would tap my B key and poop out a little grenade to explode 3 imps that could have easily been taken out any other way, and give a little applause for the show. But of course, they do fulfill a crucial role, that being falters. There's a lot of things in this game that will falter enemies, like this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, etc. Whatever. But none of them are as consistent as frag grenades. They offer a large explosion with a pretty distinct area of effect, even when it doesn't seem like it's within enemy range, and will trigger a lengthy stagger animation. They also have a very consistent detonation time that begins when the grenade touches the floor, not when you fire it. Now, the prime advantage of falters is creating a disruption in combat, creating a small window of opportunity for you to get in and do whatever you want without worry, just like with the sticky grenades. Why are these disrupts so vital? Well, in case you haven't noticed, melee hits hurt. A lot. And it's a good way to make close range weapons like the super shotgun and blood punch still effective, yet not exclusively reliable. If you get close enough to shoot a dude without a plan for what happens after, problems are gonna arise. You either need to ensure that your attack will kill or falter, or that you can retreat in time. So let's take a look at how using grenade falters can be extremely effective against demons like the Cyber Mancubus. Also, I'm going to keep bringing up the Mancubus quite a bit because he's just a perfect example of an enemy design that begs you to use the super shotgun, yet punishes you if you aren't careful with it. So, the Cyber Mancubus is a very cranky guy. If you want to walk up to him and give him a hug, he'll slam his fists on the ground and he'll get his green stuff all over you. So, step 1, press the B key to deploy a helpful dose of anesthetic to the Mancubus that will work long enough for you to get in close. Step 2, just as the anesthetic begins to take effect, use the handy precision blood punch tool to surgically remove each and every bit of affected armor from its body. Step 3, congratulations, you now have a perfectly healthy Mancubus. Grenades also make a pretty effective escape tool if you're surrounded. They don't do any self-damage, so toss one down at your feet, and it will explode very fast because, as we pointed out, it explodes on contact with the floor, not when you shoot it. It'll kill any fodder around you, and it will falter anything else long enough to get out. Now, on the subject of ice bombs. Well, they're kind of the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. It basically does everything the grenades do except better, therefore it can't be used as often. The only real downside is that it will cancel some enemy statuses, namely glory kill states, but it can do this. In a sense, it kind of fulfills the same role as the BFG, just on a much smaller scale. It also requires a little more thought to be used effectively, taking a small section of the fight that feels overwhelming, and taking it out of the equation entirely. But yeah, ultimately, it's kind of just a way to get out of combat. You get the idea. Now let's take a step back and examine the larger timing element of Doom's equipment, the cooldowns. Also a very controversial topic before release, that kinda seemed weird for a game with push-forward combat. Originally I would have preferred that they just recharge with a resource of some kind, and even now I'll admit that I don't really know if there's a way they could have gotten rid of the recharge rate or supplemented it with something else, but still have it fulfill the same role of pacing. But in their current state, they're there to be used in tandem with the rest of your combat, just not at every possible point. You survive for long enough in the combat cycle that now you have access to extra equipment that can either be used to help you with some of the tougher combat situations, i.e. heavy and super heavies, or large clusters of demons, or you can save them carefully for when you need to get out of jam. So, let's go through each of the tools one by one. The Frag and Ice Bomb recharge rate is tuned so that you can't use them on every enemy at all times, but you can save them for when you really need to. They force you to make use of your regular staggering capabilities via your weapons or weapon mods, which are available at all times, just not nearly as effective or consistent. Then, once you've survived for long enough, you can take a crack at some of the more difficult sections of the fight. As an escape tool, sporadic use means you won't have access to them when you really need to. The Flame Belch is meant to basically be used whenever, with some caveats. It won't do anything meaningful to disrupt combat, unless you count faltering a fodder, which, who cares, and can't get you out of a tight spot. It's meant to be a reward for staying in combat. Armor is always going to be an addition to your health, not part of it. What makes the Flame Belch much easier to manage is that you can get away with using it basically whenever it's recharged. Obviously, you should still wait to use it on multiple enemies, to maximize its use. You only really reliably get health back when you're very low, but the armor system does not depend on your health status. It will always give you back an equal amount. We'll talk about the Flaming Hook later, don't worry. The chainsaw was also very polarizing on first release, and its implementation in Eternal basically comes down to less ammo but replenishment more often. The tuning of the final charge on the chainsaw should make it so that if you attempt to use only a single ammo type to fight, it won't be able to recharge by the time you've emptied that specific type. Is it a perfect system? Not really. Just because of how harshly it punishes new players a lot, and at worst it can genuinely ruin some people's enjoyment of this game. But it does work, and it does encourage players to use their other weapons more, and it creates a reliable way within combat to always get ammo at some point, and it isn't really a problem at all in high tier play. Funnily enough, I went back and played a bit of 2016 and found that I actually felt like I had less ammo because my supply was not infinite. Once again, to me the chainsaw feels fine, but I wouldn't doubt that there's some other way that it could have been implemented. Maybe they'll experiment with it for the next game. But let's say you're still fuming about having a set time before you can use your whimsical abilities again. Well, allow me to introduce the second best rune in the game, Equipment Fiend. Another thing that is so much better than 2016, not because the stats are inherently better, it actually functions exactly the same, but because there is a lot more equipment for the mod to actually affect. Instead of giving you an incremental decrease in timing of a grenade that you toss basically whenever the stars align, it affects everything that you see in this corner. Except these, obviously. Now, how this works in practice is a bit strange if I'm to be honest. I mean this in the sense that its advantages would imply that your equipment is mainly to be used on fodder, which is only really true for the Flame Belch, because it incentivizes you to hit a bunch of targets and then immediately kill them. But as demonstrated, the Frag and Ice Grenades are best used against heavy demons. And even then, you aren't really supposed to kill them with grenades, but use them to sneak in more damage with your regular guns. Personally, I would change the way this rune increases its recharge rate, maybe making it so that falters also recharge it. This rune is still a top tier pick because overall you get a lot more use out of your equipment in the long run. But air control is still my main. Holy shit. Cooldowns ultimately make the pacing of fights more dynamic. They are implemented so that you have a cycle in fights where one of your abilities is on cooldown, so you should probably use something else, or focus on something else for now. You spend the first cycle of the fight exhausting every weapon and tool at your disposal, and assuming you've used them all effectively by the time you're completely out, each of them will be available again just at the time you need it. There's actually quite a bit of enemy design, mainly stuff introduced in the Ancient Gods Part 1, that also plays into this dynamic pacing. Turrets and Bloodmakers share the trait of being technically invincible until a certain window of opportunity. What this means in practice is, don't waste ammo or your focus when they aren't vulnerable. As in, if you can't kill them right now, focus on one of the other 10,000 threats in your vicinity while keeping them in your peripheral vision. Or just play with the sound on. This is what keeps Doom's individual fights from becoming stale. A lot of its pacing comes from cycles, both at the macro scale, reserving certain equipment for certain enemies, or focusing on a different enemy while the most effective tool for them is active, and the micro scale, marauders, or certain weapon combos. But there's one rechargeable that I didn't talk about because its place in combat is a little bit different. Yeah, of course its primary use is obvious. You see another demon suddenly start to telegraph an attack and begin to give you a noble speech about how much his next attack is gonna hurt, and you think, oh crap, seems like he's gonna hit me in the next few seconds. You press the shift key and are magically transported a few feet to the right without a scratch. But how can we get more use out of this mechanic? Well, let's dive into its technical aspects a bit more. 2 charges, each takes about a second to become active again. Using a second dash while the first is recharging will cancel the recharge on the first one, and the dashes can be used on land, in the air, or in water, but who cares about that. If you use it in mid-air, it won't fully recharge until you've hit the ground. Basic stuff, all it means is that you can use the dash whenever you want, even twice if you feel so inclined, just don't spam it. It's also an effective navigation tool by helping you zip across arenas quickly, or, more interestingly, provide additional movement options in the air. This is actually the main point of the platforming segments in the game, other than just to break up the combat sections for a bit more pacing. It's to get a feel for how your movement tools can be used in midair, or, more specifically, what combination of these tools is most effective for maximizing airtime and distance. The double jump is an extension of your current velocity, keeping you at the same speed you are going. If you use air control, you can strafe with the velocity as well, just don't move backwards. The dashes have a very specific speed and distance that will cancel any other forces that may be acting on you. It doesn't matter how fast you're going, if you dash, all of your current velocity disappears. It will also only change your movement on a horizontal plane. So, if you dash while falling towards Earth, or hell I guess, you will stop falling, travel a bit to the left, and then slowly gain downwards momentum as though you had just started moving down. How does this add a surprising amount of depth to the mid-air movement options? Ironically. Well, if you're able to time your use of dashes and double jump correctly, you can extend your airtime significantly and shift the vertical level of the battlefield from the ground up into the sky. What advantages does this give? Quite a few, actually. Obviously, it's way harder to hit you. Adding the third dimension to the equation, having nearly every enemy in the game fire projectiles makes them much easier to avoid, and melee attacks become basically non-existent. Whenever I find myself fighting a tyrant, I output almost all of my damage while I'm in the air. Even though they're meant more to be fought around, landing a couple of shots in whenever you can, outputting a lot of damage on them all at once does require focus. And I don't really mean focus as in concentration, they don't require the most brain power to fight. I mean that you're going to spend a lot of time shooting them, time that you can't really divert to worry about dodging every other attack coming your way. But if you're in the air, you don't need to worry about the absurd amount of attacks coming your way. If you time your use of dashes and double jump to prolong your air time, you can completely avoid a majority of attacks that would have otherwise been extremely punishing. You know what else you can avoid a lot by being in the air? I absolutely despise all of the AoE and wave ground attacks in this game. Seriously, these account for about 90% of the times when I just get locked into a series of unavoidable hits. The annoying part about these attacks is not that they feel unfair or that they do an absurd amount of damage, it's that they somehow manage to track your movement better than any other projectile in the game. Like, seriously, what is this? What am I looking at? So, dashes aren't nearly as effective against them. The attacks often come in volleys of 3, so if you're not careful, you will get stuck for a long time, and most importantly, they stun lock you temporarily. The same thing goes for all of the AoE ground attacks. It's the whole reason why it's difficult to use the SSG against a Mancubus, because their ground attack will keep you in place, and it can protect them from all sides, so it doesn't matter if they're slow to turn around. They're actually much more dangerous than in Doom 2016, because if you're in range, they'll do this attack repeatedly, to the point where the only thing that will stop it is a falter. This is why being in the air for an extended period of time is so helpful for avoiding these ground attacks, as they become completely ineffective. Of course, unless they decide to do something like this. Timing your dashes to stay at a specified height above the ground and canceling downward momentum is one of the most useful tricks I've learned throughout my playtime. This is actually a trick you can learn about or take advantage of while using the Destroyer Blade. The codex itself for this mod literally says, start charging it in midair to minimize lockdown time. The fact that it shoots a horizontal wave of energy means it's meant to be used on the ground. The same effect can kind of be seen to a lesser degree with the lock-on rockets. The only reason you'll need to come back to the ground is to recharge your dashes. So, you should be looking for opportunities when the coast is clear, and then time both when you can hit the ground without being swarmed, and when you can take to the skies while your movement abilities are recharged. The dashes are a great example of a tool that has a hidden depth allowing for more options during play. Different combinations of movement options and timing each one effectively allow for an entirely new dimension of play. And this is a lesson that can be applied to other aspects of the game, finding new uses for seemingly underpowered tools. There's one other key part of the air movement tools that I haven't touched on yet. That's right, baby, we can finally talk about the meat hook. Not the super shotgun though, specifically the meat hook. I remember when they showed this off at E3 and I was thinking, they could re-release Doom 2016 with this being the only change, and it would have been perfect. And lo and behold, it was an amazing addition that builds perfectly on Eternal's new and improved system. It provides a brand new mechanic that fulfills a need in the new combat system, getting directly to an enemy quickly, usually to get its resources, is very easy to understand the use, provides a variety of brand new traversal options that aren't going to be used until the second DLC a full year after the game's release for some reason, still has a decent amount of depth to its mechanics, and is just plain old fun. When I first acquired it, I noticed that it functioned quite a bit differently than other grappling mechanics I've played around with. Titanfall 2 and Just Cause 3 immediately come to mind. These grappling hooks have a very loose, bungee cord-esque feeling. As it's deployed, it takes a little bit for the pulling speed to reach its maximum velocity. If your direction of velocity is different from the attachment point, for example hooking onto a ceiling but moving horizontally, you'll end up with a Spider-Man-esque swing around it. And don't get me wrong, these are amazing mechanics with a really high skill ceiling that I can't even begin to use to their highest potential. Eternals function a bit differently, however. Where the other ones are a bit more floaty, encouraging a lot more of a swinging motion, Doom's is very firm. As soon as it gets attached to an enemy, you get lurched forward at a consistent speed, and possibly suffer a severe spinal injury or whiplash. Just like the dashes, the speed at which you get pulled in is completely static. It does not ramp up, ramp down, or change depending on if there's anything in your way. Funnily enough, if you're going really fast from something like a ballista boost or a jump pad, the meat hook will actually slow down your momentum to match its regular speed. Turning sharply, shooting, jumping, or switching weapons will all break the chain. And as a little side note here, the key towards successful meat hook flings is to break the chain in literally any way that isn't jumping. I don't know why it took me so many months to figure this out. Jumping is an excellent method for getting a lot of height, and in fact it provides the most lift out of basically any tool you have because it effectively gives you a third jump. Combine this with what we learned from the previous section. You can use it on a demon to gain height, then carefully time your dashes to maximize airtime, and if you do it right, the meat hook should be recharged just before or as you hit the ground. Once again, very useful in tyrant fights. Because all you really need to do is output as much damage as possible, you can worry just about staying in midair for as long as possible while shooting, and not need to worry about other enemies as much. Another great thing the air control /dash meat hook combo allows is the ability to make actual use of the area beyond the arena, or all the area above the death zone basically. It still makes you much harder to hit, but has the added advantage of no enemies being able to spawn around you, or swarm you. It's very useful when you feel overwhelmed and have the meat hook available, where you can just jump off the edge of the map, use your dashes to stay at the same height, and then when the time is right, meat hook swing to a safe location. You don't even need to stray far from the edge to make it effective. Simply dashing out and using the meat hook to return can get you out of a surprising amount of jams. Obviously, this is something you don't need to use too regularly, but it does a great job at expanding the useful play area when you need it to. Take a look at this clip of the Holt Bridge with the possessed tyrant. This area is designed so that both tyrants and other enemies that spawn will force you onto one side of the bridge. Trying to cross them means tanking a lot of melee hits, but with a meat hook swing to the side from a safe distance, you can go off the bridge and use your dashes to make it safely to the other side. In summary, the essence of Eternal's air combat is as follows. The sky is an excellent place to avoid all sorts of damage. To repeat, at the macro scale you should be looking for opportunities to take to the sky whenever you can, but ensure that you time when and where you come back down to not get swarmed. On the micro scale you should be timing your use of the meat hook, dashes, and jump to optimize both height and position. Sometimes getting far away before you hit the ground is much more important than staying in the air for a long time. Alright, now let's get back to the meat hook. So, remember how switching away from the meat hook doesn't get rid of your velocity entirely? Well, this basically works the instant you tap another button. If you look at an enemy, meat hook them, and then swap to something else, you will still get to them in the same amount of time. Remember how I said that this section is about the meat hook, not the super shotgun? That's because you shouldn't really think of them as the same weapon. There are no rules dictating that you must exclusively fire the SSG after a meat hook. What if we, say, switch to the plasma rifle with a charged heat blast? What if we switch to the precision bolt? This one's my personal favorite. What if we switch to the rock? You get the idea. If you still need to hurl yourself at an enemy but want to use a different weapon, there's nothing stopping you. Hell, if you're a stickler and want to finish off a fodder with a single shell instead of two, you can switch to the combat shotgun. If you want a guaranteed fodder kill but still need to maintain some distance, the precision bolt is excellent for that, and it's really fun to do. And up until now, I've also kind of glossed over the amazing mastery, the flaming hook. This addition turns the SSG into yet another reward tool. It gives the meat hook a secondary purpose other than mobility, and makes it actually useful for fodder. But hold on a second, because that flame does not last very long. In fact, it lasts just long enough for you to fire a shot at the end of a hook, and no more. And another thing to note is that the timer on the flame starts at the beginning of the hook, not while it's active. Even if you break the chain a second after it gets attached, the timer will start to tick, and this allows for a lot of opportunities within that time frame. The precision bolt is an excellent way to get the armor without needing to be very close, and arguably conserves more ammo. As documented by many others, if you have the Savagery rune equipped, you can very easily get armor out of glory kills. You can actually get armor from the chainsaw animation if you hit the buttons in rapid succession. If you deploy and then switch away from the meat hook fast enough, it becomes a long-range source of armor. Think of the end of the hook as a projectile not really attached to anything on your end. Remember how a shotgun grenade is the easiest way to stagger a cacodemon and then meat hook in to get the armor? I found that another just as good, if not better, method is shooting them with an arbalest, and then in the time it takes to actually explode, switch to the meat hook. While it consumes more ammo and doesn't necessarily give you a return on health, it's much faster, can be done at any angle, and has a bit of an area of effect. It's really good for cacodemon swarms. And it preserves momentum because the cacodemon will explode just as you reach it. Also, side note, the attachment point of the meat hook will stay the same even if its target has been killed. The versatility of the meat hook in combination with other weapons and tools is so rewarding to experiment with because the design is so consistent. The mechanics of how it changes your velocity are simplified so that A, it's playable on a controller, and B, you can execute precise moves very consistently because you know exactly how it's going to operate. The flaming hook is an interesting tool that could easily be baked into the gun itself, as in just make it so that only a shot from the SSG will result in armor, but instead, it's its own thing, so feel free to experiment with its utility. But what about other weapons or weapon mods? Do they have a design philosophy built around consistent timing and versatility with their uses?
Yes.
Plasma shields always take the same amount of shots to break, so you can memorize the exact timing of plasma rifle ammo to use. The microwave beam can stun lock any demon permanently by weapon switching fast. Charging lock on rockets in midair has a similar advantage to the destroyer blade. Chain gun shield charges with any damage that you output while it's open, including shooting a rocket before you deploy it. Knowing how much damage an attack will do allows you to glory kill the second an animation starts. Quick switching from a gun with faltering capabilities allows you to get up and close with more powerful tools. The switching animation from the precision bolt can be carried on to two weapons or back and forth between a single weapon. Prowlers will always teleport within your sightline and do so within a specific window of time so you can catch them off guard with a super shotgun blast. You can attach a sticky bomb to a bloodmaker right before it's vulnerable so it explodes the second before they attack. Timing a ballista shot with an upwards burst of momentum will send you even higher. The precision bolt quick switch also works with sticky bombs. The arbalist explosion can falter enemies so you can time it with other effective weapons. Hitting melee right after swapping weapon mods can bypass the animation. Quickly swapping between the microwave beam gives the demon a health bar. The Boston Basher will speed up a medic's supercharge rate if you hit yourself with it. Whew. Okay. Point is, almost nothing in Eternal has just one use. Don't look at weapon timers or charging timers as downsides, look at them as tools. If you get creative with the consistent timing and effects of what seem like more underwhelming abilities, you can get a lot more use out of them. Look beyond the surface level function and take advantage of whatever you can. Experiment with different quick switching patterns to effectively take out each type of demon. Try to find what weapons work best for getting the armor from the meat hook. Remember, Doom Eternal isn't a first-person shooter, it's a rhythm game. But now let's wrap this video up and summarize it with everybody's favorite enemy that basically encapsulates every bit of timing and rhythm and pacing element that I've talked about today. Okay, it's been a year, everybody knows how these guys work at this point. Game journalists hate them, high-level players love them, they're introverts and they hate being the center of attention, so when you shoot them regularly, they hide behind their little shield. So you coax them out, encourage them to come talk, and then they accidentally blink super hard and you unload enough munition upon them to level a small city. And they become even more outgoing when you chuck a grenade or two at them. What I've found most interesting about Marauders is that they've turned from a genuine discussion on game design, what they can teach the player, and whether or not they were a good addition, into effectively a little speedrun within Doom Eternal. At this point, the Super Shotgun Ballista Super Shotgun combo is just the normal, safest, and most efficient way to fight them. But using all the tools and all the timing mechanics we've discussed today, except for air timing, people have found so many ways to kill them in 2 or even just a single cycle. Even the Super Shotgun Ballista combo still takes 3 cycles. Given that the 2 frag grenades basically double the amount of time they're vulnerable, there's a lot of creative ways that I've seen people sneak in additional damage. For example, charging up the Arbalist at the beginning to immediately get a burst of damage, or finishing off with a powerful weapon that has a long switch speed like the SSG. I've seen people use lock-on rockets, the shield on the chain gun, the turret on the chain gun, the full auto shotgun, blood punching in between staggers, precision bolt combos, micro missiles, among other things. There's even more ways of faltering them mid-combo that doesn't require frag grenades. The sheer amount of weapon combinations available certainly shows that the Marauder does not force you to do one thing and one thing only. They force you to get creative with weapon switching, take advantage of the faltering system, and wait for precise openings in combat. Recently I've been playing a lot of the modded master levels and the new Horde mode. I've actually been using footage from some of them in this video. And they have a tendency to throw Marauders into tight spaces alongside a lot of other demons or throw multiple into the same arena. The classic mode for the official Super Gore-Nest master level has that one Foggy encounter, and I really love it because it forces you to take him out without the Super Shotgun or the Ballista. It got me experimenting a lot more with precision bolt combos. And you know what? They're nearly as annoying in these spaces as you'd think. Except for this one part in the second horror mode. Seriously, I hate this part. Once again, take a lesson from the Bloodmakers. They aren't as much of a threat when not being directly focused. Obviously, this doesn't mean don't be aware of them because they love to chase you. But a Marauder's only long-range attack is one that happens very infrequently and is one of the slowest projectiles in the game. Certainly slow enough for you to dodge reliably. And I think that this serves as a great lesson in experimentation. I've sunk too many hours into this game, and it's just because I love experimenting with all of the given tools, and the combat is just so fun that it keeps my interest. The idea of fast weapon switching is almost a revolution for the FPS genre, where instead of tactically timing reloads, the timing element is all about bypassing the fire rate of slow weapons. The rhythmic pattern of knowing exactly which keys to press at what time during a Marauder combo feels so good to execute. The pacing of being chased around for a bit and then turning the tides when an opportunity arises makes for some very unique encounters. But I'm getting a bit sidetracked here, so let's wrap this up. My original intent for this video was just to cover the timing aspect of some of the weapon mods that I had seen covered before, and then sort of encapsulate them all into one big video, but there's a lot more to this game than that. It's about the timing that certain weapon mods and tools take to be effective. It's about the pacing in the arena fights, where cooldowns and the rate that your abilities become available and effective keep the fights from being stale. It's about the rhythmic feeling of being able to execute perfect weapon swap combos, or doing a sequence of actions in perfect succession, with such precision that a frag grenade fired at the beginning of a combo doesn't come into play until you've cycled through 4 different guns. Eternal is a game that at first glance feels like all of its mechanics are just thrown on top of each other with no regard for how they work in tandem. But each of them is a puzzle piece, and I hope that this video was a good little deep dive into the way that timing, pacing, and rhythm fit into the puzzle.